guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name's Izzy and I make videos about my scoliosis journey. Today's video is going to be kind of a timeline of my spinal fusion recovery. On my Instagram, which I will link in the description, I get asked a lot about time frames when I could do certain things. So I will explain pretty much everything I could do for the first 6 months of my recovery, and I will try to insert as many pictures as I can in one of these corners. Before I go into my recovery timeline, I just want you guys to remember that everybody is so different with recovery. So these are just when I started doing certain things. It can depend on when you feel comfortable doing certain things, when your doctor allows you to do those things, where you're fused, and just so much goes into it. Okay, so I'm going to start with the day of my surgery, which was March 5th of 2019. I'm fused T2 through L1, and I had 2 surgeons who were doing my surgery, and it took about 3 hours. So I was in the hospital for 4 days and 3 nights, and on March 8th of 2019 is the day I went home. So how long you're in the hospital, once again, just depends on your hospital and things like that, but typically the time frame of people being in the hospital is about 4 to 7 days. On March 11th was when I had my first shower, and if you're having spinal fusion soon, a huge tip is to braid your hair or do something with your hair so it's just out of the way. But another tip that goes with that is do not take your braids out or whatever you did with your hair until you are absolutely ready to shower. That was a mistake we made, is we took my braids out before I was ready to shower, and then I just had the biggest mess with my hair. So just make sure that you do not take your braids out until you're ready to shower. Then on March 12th is when my bandage came off, which is a really common question, and everybody has different types of bandages and stuff, so mine came off pretty easy. Some take longer to come off and are harder to get off, but mine came off pretty fast and pretty easy. The day my bandage came off was a pretty hard day. I wasn't doing well, wasn't feeling well, didn't get much accomplished that day. But then on March 13th, I took my first walk outside, which was a huge moment. And it was also when I turned the corner, which is basically just when you start feeling better. So I was then starting to walk better and faster and just longer distances. So yes, that was my first walk outside, and I just walked around my neighborhood, and my grandma walked with me. Then March 14th, we went to my town's activity center and I walked the track. I'm not sure exactly how far I went, but it was a pretty good long walk. It was still painful and uncomfortable, but it was getting better. Then on March 15th or 16th, I'm not exactly sure when because we don't have any pictures to document this, but that is when I went number 2 for the first time after surgery, which is a really big deal after fusion because with all the pain meds and things like that, it causes you to be really constipated. On March 18th was my first time dribbling the basketball. I didn't do anything super hard, but I just regularly dribbled. I went in between my legs and behind my back. It wasn't any more painful than just regular walking was. Also, a lot of these time frames are just different walking accomplishments because after fusion, you can't do much for a while, so you really just walk a lot. March 22nd, I had my party, which is just a little party to celebrate fusion and all that. So it was just at a restaurant here in my town, and I did bring my wheelchair just because I wasn't sure if I would be able to sit in the restaurant chairs, and then too about walking and stuff. So I don't know how long I stayed. I think it was about 2 hours, and then we just ate, and then they have some little games and things like that. On March 25th, I went back to school, and I didn't go back to school full days, but I went back half days. I did have a 504 plan, which had accommodations in it, and then I could go to the nurse whenever I needed to lay down and get icy hot patches and use the heat pad. And then I also had my wheelchair to help me get from class to class. Even though I still did walk, it was just to push my things in. So it wasn't super painful, but also a little bit uncomfortable. But I would just go every day that I possibly could, and then I would go for as long as I could, and eventually worked my way up into full days. Fast forward to April. On April 11th is when I started to do more normal things. I went to my backyard and I played on my play set. I went on my swing and down my slide. And then I also started to play with my dog in the backyard. On April 13th, I went to a WSU volleyball game, and typically they last about 3 hours, but I was only able to stay about an hour and a half because then I started to get sore. So we stayed for that as long as I could, and it was pretty good. And the chairs there are super uncomfortable. They're like really short and they're really hard and plastic. On April 21st, which was Easter, I sat and had family dinner for a good amount of time, probably 2 to 3 hours. And then right after that, still on Easter, I had my first TV interview. So that was probably another hour and a half of sitting. So that day definitely was a lot of sitting, but I managed to get through it all. It was painful, but once again, it was getting a lot better. May 4th was my first Curvy Girl meeting. So I think this lasted about 2 to 3 hours. Typically our meetings are pretty long. So I was able to, I can't remember exactly what we did, but it either involved standing or sitting. So I was able to sit for the full. May 14th was my first bike ride. It wasn't long or anything. I seriously just went like around my cul-de-sac. But I was also not able to bend, twist, or lift yet. So I had to be super careful and just make sure that I wasn't like bending or twisting or anything like that. So it was just a slow bike ride, but it was still a bike ride. A little before my 3 months post-op, I got my BLT restrictions lifted, so then I was able to bend, twist, and lift again. May 21st, I started doing like small exercises. So we went to my town's activity center and just did some little like workout things, nothing intense. I wasn't lifting weights really, but just using the little exercising machines. And then I also started practicing volleyball with my dad. May 27th was a big one. It was when I started swimming again. So that's a huge question I get asked. I get asked all the time, when were you able to swim and things like that. So we have an above ground pool. So I was able to swim as soon as I felt like it and was allowed to do it, which is also just relaxing for your muscles and things like that. Another super commonly asked question I get is if I can bend and if I can touch my toes. So yes, I can bend and yes, I can touch my toes. This depends on where you're fused, but my fused part of my spine does not bend, so I bend on my hips or at my waist. So on May 29th, I was getting a lot closer to touching my toes. I pretty much practiced touching my toes every day. At first, I could barely bend at all. I'll insert some pictures of kind of a progression of touching my toes, but I was definitely getting a lot closer to touching my toes at this time. Then just like 3 to 4 days after the 27th, I was finally able to touch my toes. And just like anybody else, even people with not fused spines are still not always able to touch their toes, but I luckily still can. Fast forward to June. On June 6th specifically, I was feeling a lot more normal. I practiced volleyball with my friends, once again just at my activity center, and we just played around and things like that. So like I said, June is when I really started to feel just more normal, or how I used to feel. So I practiced volleyball a lot more. I was swimming a lot. I was like playing in my backyard, riding my bike, just things that normal kids and teens do. June 24th was my first ballet class after fusion. So I used to do dance more seriously, but after surgery I just did a easy class. It was actually an adult class, so I was the only teen or kid in that class. Still on June 24th was my first cartwheel and first handstand. So my first cartwheel was kind of scary, but it actually wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. It felt a little weird because getting into the position is a little bit harder because you don't bend the same way as you used to. But the cartwheel, I would say, looked pretty normal, especially considering I wasn't too far post-op. And then my handstands, I still don't do handstands without a wall or something I can kick my feet up onto, because I'm scared if I flip over, I won't be able to catch myself and I'll fall directly onto my back. So my first handstand was actually just up against my fence. June 25th was actually my first time ever mowing my yard. I never had mowed a yard before surgery, and then this was my first time ever, and especially post-op mowing my yard. It was a little painful, and even mowing now is still a little painful because it's just the mowers are heavy and you have to turn in weird ways, but it wasn't like super painful. June 30th was my first underwater somersault. So that was actually really easy. I can do them forward and backward. I can do forward and backward at the same time. So that was easy. And then I also at some point did a somersault on the floor. I used pillows so that when I went over, I wouldn't like hit the ground super hard. But I've done somersaults in water and on the ground, and I have no problem doing somersaults either way. But like I said, when I do them on the ground, I just have to be a little more careful because I do kind of flop over instead of slowly going over. And I can even do them backwards on the ground too. July 4th, aka 4th of July, I went to my friend's lake and they have paddle boards and kayaks. So I used the paddle board and went in the kayak, and those both really didn't cause any pain, except for the kayak was a little uncomfortable because, well, number one, you have to paddle, which is like a weird motion, and then it also takes some weird muscles. And then also the sea is like an odd angle and things, but it really wasn't painful. July 24th, I had my first volleyball camp, and I did everything everybody else did. I just didn't scrimmage because I wasn't allowed to play competitively. So any game-like situation we did, I just sat out of. So one of my favorite things ever is to go to my aunt's farm and ride four-wheelers, which I was super bummed that I couldn't do them for a while after surgery. But on July 27th was my first time riding four-wheelers after surgery. So this, once again, wasn't super painful, but a little uncomfortable because obviously there is parts of the farm that are bumpy. And the only thing that caused me to be sore was four-wheelers don't have like a back to them, so you have to sit unsupported. So that kind of made my shoulder blades a little bit sore, but other than that, it didn't cause any pain. Now in August 11th was my first time riding jet skis and going tubing. So this really didn't cause any pain. It didn't cause me to be sore, nothing at all. And we went pretty fast. On September 5th was my first volleyball game, so that was actually exactly 6 months post-op. So I had just been released to play competitively again. Currently, I am a year and a half post-op, but here is just like a few things I've done. I've done back bends, which don't look exactly like regular back bends, but they are pretty good for having a fused spine. I've made my basketball team and I played softball. I've went on trampolines and I did a front handspring on the trampoline and front flips on the trampoline. And I hope to do roller coasters sometime soon. This is something that I definitely want to do in the future. As of right now, I have no restrictions and I pretty much live a normal life. So that is it for today's video. I hope this timeline was helpful for any of you who are having surgery or who recently had surgery. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. And like I said, my Instagram will be linked in the description box. Bye, guys.